Welcome to the Sky Talk Doc podcast, where we navigate life, relationships, and everything in between with thought-provoking curiosity and a touch of grace. Buckle up, Buttercup. This is a flight you won't forget. Before we get into today's podcast and our amazing guest, I just want to tell you, you're not broken. You're just wired for survival in a world that doesn't always feel safe. Maybe you keep people at a distance because deep down you don't feel very lovable, or maybe you overachieve because a part of you believes you're not enough. But that's not weakness. It's your brain doing its best to protect an old wound. But here's the thing. What protected you then might be sabotaging you now. If you're tired of the same arguments, same spirals, or feeling unseen in your relationships, take the 7 Primal Wounds quiz at 7primalwounds.com to find out what your wound is and stop the same crappy patterns, chaos, and relationship conflict today. Good morning, Dr. Kelly. We are going to talk about functional medicine, all things holistic health and wellness, which is definitely one of our favorite topics on this podcast. So if you could share with the listeners a little bit about how you ended up here as a formal doctor who probably, I imagine, had some time in the non-holistic fields. I'd love to hear your story, share with the listeners, and then we'll get started.
Sounds great. Thank you for having me, Michaela. I was actually always interested in holistic and holistic medicine. We didn't call it functional medicine back then, but I remember contemplating going to medical school, and I really wanted to go to acupuncture school. And so my parents said to me, well, you should really apply, right? Apply to regular medical school and see what happens. And I said, okay, well, if I don't get in, I'm going to acupuncture school. Gosh darn it, I get into 4 medical schools. So
no.
My fate was sealed. I had made that agreement with myself and my family. So that's what I did. I went to Tulane Medical School, got a master's in public health along the way. But because I always knew that I wanted to do holistic medicine, I studied with an acupuncturist. I took a bunch of classes. I did Reiki classes and healing touch all through medical school. And in residency, kind of same thing. I did a mentorship with a medical acupuncturist, a medical doctor who did acupuncture, and so was able to really express as much as I could and learn as much as I could throughout my medical training. And then as soon as I graduated from residency, I was like, oh, I'm free, thank God. I can start to really dive in and learn what I wanted to learn. I did the University of Arizona's program in integrative medicine, and I was in the last residential class with Dr. Andrew Weil. And that was an amazing experience and really provided a foundational framework for me to think about how to help people, how to refer to acupuncturists, how to refer and do nutrition counseling, things like that. And then I did functional medicine. After that, I was seeing patients in Southern California and really building my functional medicine practice. And it's just gone deeper and broader since. I tended to attract a lot of complex chronic illness patients. I started seeing mold patients and then realized, okay, they also mostly have Lyme disease. And so I had to learn about Lyme disease. And I had learned a lot about environmental toxin exposure in my residency, in my fellowship with the Andrew Weil program, and just kept diving deeper into that as well. And I think that's actually a huge component of health and illness today that is just now starting to get recognized as a root cause for many people's illnesses.
Well, we had a guest on the podcast last week, and I was a living case study for her. So I met her 2 years ago, went through an intense detox process with her for all sorts of things, including heavy metals, had proof that the blood was purified and clean via dry blood analysis. Fast forward 1 year of living on the West Coast where I live. And it literally, she said, it looks like the blood of a Parkinson's person. This is how much heavy metals was in my body in a period of 1 year, even though I was completely detoxed and we had the proof. So I completely concur that a lot is coming up with heavy metals. I also think that there's some misunderstandings about heavy metals in general. And I'm thinking about, things like mercury and fish and stuff like that as well. So I love that you're doing this. And I'm curious because I read a fantastic book, forgetting the name now, but there is a holistic company in Arizona, and they very specifically treat cancers and things like that. They use 11th harmonic frequencies combined with other stuff. I'm wondering if that is associated with where you studied. I wish I could remember. I could probably find the book in my Amazon, but it's fantastic. And I've actually had a few people that have reached out to me from hearing other podcast episodes, and I've referred them to that facility because I believe that they are taking a holistic, wholly functional approach to the entire body. And a lot of the mental health stuff that I see is related to stuff that's just floating around and creating havoc.
Yes, I don't think it's the same program. This was the University of Arizona's Center for Integrative Medicine. So it's affiliated with a, reputable major university. So probably not a lot of resonance type things. Although I do recall meeting some people who were doing more resonance frequency work, both in Tucson at the University of Arizona, and then people who are doing those sorts of things in the Phoenix area.
So what are you seeing the most right now coming into your practice in terms of like problems that maybe people are having or that sort of thing? What's the big issue? And I believe too that something that's untapped and untouched is the fact that, tumors are not a problem. They're actually the human body's way of protecting you from what is not benefiting you by creating the cocoon. And, the biopsies and things like this, like kind of I don't want to call it allopathic medicine, but that framework is actually creating more problems than less by jabbing a needle into something that the body built to protect itself. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
So yeah, it's an interesting thing. You asked me two questions, so maybe I'll start with the first question. I see a lot, as I mentioned, complex chronic illness. People will come in with chronic fatigue, brain fog. They might have hormonal dysregulation. They have a lot of gut issues. But what I'm looking for is not only to help them feel better, but to also really understand what are the root causes of what's going on. And what I see predominantly is mold exposed patients who may or may not have other chronic infections. They probably have other environmental toxic exposures, but they have mast cell activation syndrome, which is a hypersensitivity syndrome that manifests in a whole host of different inflammatory and allergic type symptoms. And so sometimes they'll have histamine intolerance, but not always. Mast cells are part of our immune system, and their job is to sound the alarm when they see foreign invaders.
Yeah.
And they see foreign invaders everywhere because we're bathing in a toxic soup of so many different chemicals. But not everybody has these hypersensitivity reactions. About pre-COVID, the statistics were that about 17% of the population had or were at risk for mast cell activation. I think post-COVID, it's probably closer to 25%. I think a lot of long haul COVID patients actually have mast cell activation syndrome, and it's not being diagnosed and adequately treated. So those are the type of patients who I see. They've seen 2 dozen other doctors. They still feel terrible. They can eat between 5 and 10 foods or less. And they're just not getting better. And they have multiple symptoms, multiple systems that are dysfunctional. That's what I see. And so the trick is to really figure out, okay, what are the root causes? And then how do we calm everything down so that we can actually address that toxic burden.
Well, and you talked to something else, and I do want to dive into it a little bit, which is the virus component of things, because Lyme disease was what you mentioned. And I found in my research, and this took a whole lot of time inside Google Scholar, in the depths of Google Scholar, like really searching for the right words and that sort of a thing, which obviously I have background in research, so I can do that. And I think the general populace probably doesn't know that that's an available resource. And what I found is there was an immense connection to hypothyroidism and Epstein-Barr. And truly a big part of my detox was to get rid of the Epstein-Barr. And all of the doctors that I would go to would say, well, yeah, your titer shows that you've had it, but everybody's had it. It's not a thing. You don't need to worry about that. And I was saying, I think it is a thing. I think it's living in my thyroid. And I think that's why my body's attacking itself. I actually don't think that the human body is designed to just attack itself for no reason. And I was called crazy by family practice physicians. But I made the option to continue the detox process to actually remove the virus from the body. And what I found was that my thyroid levels almost immediately, my dosing, as soon as I was purged and cleaned. And by the way, the virus said hello before it said goodbye. So I struggled with mono for like 9 months, almost 6 to 9 months. Finally kicked it. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we need to lower your thyroid. Oh, we need to lower your thyroid. And I'm like, by the same people that said, no, that virus isn't what's causing problems with your thyroid. So I love your perspective on it. And this is not to, again, put any judgment onto medical doctors, because I think that we do the best we have with what we have in front of us and what we have been brought up to understand. And there's a lot coming out. I mean, it's changing every day. So I'd be curious your thoughts on that.
Sure. The thyroid is very susceptible in multiple different aspects to attack by environmental toxicants. So yeah, there are multiple studies. You can look at these different studies. Perchlorate, for example, which comes from plain fuel, that actually is very toxic to the thyroid. And mercury is also very toxic to the thyroid. I have a patient who had Hashimoto's. She still has some very mild Hashimoto's, but her thyroid antibodies were sky high, like in the multiple thousands. We happened to put her on ivermectin as a preventative for COVID because she was working. She didn't want to get sick. She was nervous to take the vaccine. So we did ivermectin, just prophylactic doses, like 12 milligrams twice a week. And her thyroid antibodies just kept going down and down and down and down. And yes, her need for thyroid medication also reduced because we were getting at the root cause. Now, was it a virus that had driven it? Was it a parasite that had driven it? Hard to say, because ivermectin has both antiviral and antiparasitic activity, but it absolutely improved. I had another patient who was mercury toxic. She was eating sushi like 2 to 4 times a week, thinking this is so healthy for me. And same thing, her Hashimoto's antibodies were sky high. And we did start doing chelation with her. And this was a woman who was a fitness person, right? She worked out on a regular basis. She was very, very healthy otherwise. And, chelation was pretty tough, but by the end, she's like jogging to her chelation appointments, getting the IVs, and then jogging back home. We probably did 50 IVs. But absolutely, her thyroid doses were cut more than half. And I don't think that we were going to completely reverse the Hashimoto's because she had it for 35 plus years. But we certainly improved the functionality to a certain point. So, I think that the way that I think about it is these toxins attach to the thyroid tissue itself. And then the immune system, which is constantly surveilling for foreign invaders, will see this conglomerate of a toxin attached to the tissue, and it starts to misperceive that tissue as foreign. And so it will attack that. But the drivers will be different. It could be Epstein-Barr, as in your case. It could be a variety of different other things. And with any autoimmune condition, we want to find what is the trigger, what is the driver. We know in inflammatory bowel disease that oftentimes it can be an immune system trigger against a normal gut flora bacteria, right? Or it could be a pathogenic bacteria. With Hashimoto's, I do find that a lot of patients do far better if they're gluten-free, because gluten looks very similar to the immune system as the thyroid. So virtually all of my autoimmune patients are on gluten-free diets, regardless of what the diagnosis is.
Yeah, that's incredible. In my journey, I found we did a multi-approach. So we did tackle parasites, we tackled yeast, we tackled fungus. In tackling the yeast, that included obviously more of the gluten-free diet. I'm still a huge lover of sourdough and I will buy that loaf all day long, but it's better in terms of gluten because of the way that it processes. So I feel like I found like my sweet spot there. And huge, I'm an avid ocean fisherman. and was eating a lot of fish, including raw and non-frozen, only comes to find out later that they're riddled with parasites when they're not frozen first. And even then, they still have them. So now I actually am also on a maintenance parasite cleanse that I just kind of take, because I've really reduced my fish intake and I don't eat any shellfish anymore. But I still feel like I kind of need that maintenance. And it's really fascinating to hear you explain it like this. And I feel like it will give hope to so many people that maybe just kind of intuitively felt like something isn't right. And they feel crazy when they go to the doctor and that there is a path toward healing. And I think that's probably the most fascinating part of what you said, right? It gives people hope that we're not just stuck with this autoimmune disorder for the rest of our life. And maybe we are, but in a manageable way.
Absolutely. You know, our genetics are not our destiny. And when you look at the epidemiology of autoimmune conditions, they're skyrocketing. It's not genetic, right? There's a genetic predisposition. Certainly, I have a genetic predisposition. My mom has celiac disease. My risk for celiac disease is, 14%. And I think it goes up to 40% when you have a first degree relative who also has it, right? So genetics are one component, epigenetics are another component. And really, the environmental chemicals, whether that's mold, plastics, mercury, bisphenols, flame retardants, et cetera. Like I can go on and on and on and talk about all these different chemicals and how they disrupt our immune systems, our nervous systems, our endocrine systems. And yet those are the things that are driving the autoimmune conditions, the allergies, all the children's allergies. Peanut allergies were very rare when I was little. Obesity was even more rare, right? So it's really these hidden chemicals. Plastics, microplastics, nanoplastics. Unfortunately, a lot of seafood and fish is contaminated, not just with metals, it's contaminated with lots of plastics as well. And we don't have a way other than plasmapheresis at this point to get plastics out of the body. So really avoidance is key.
So I have a lot of pilots that listen to this podcast. I would love if you could give a tip on, definitely, I was even just saying, when I fly this 80-year-old warbird, she's got this big radial engine on the top and she's just spewing this combination of fine mist, aerosol, grease all over me. And my hair is nappy, the whole thing. And I've often wondered, well, because sometimes for days after flying a long period of time, it's in my olfactories. Like all I can smell is that. And I actually did a story post on social media. I found these little things you can kind of like sniff that retrain your olfactories, right? And I had a lot of people that reached out and they're like, we do the same thing for the diesel, whatevers that I drive at work, heavy equipment operators, things like that. So I would love for you to share a tip on how people that are maybe around these environmental toxins on the daily can overcome it and or help reduce the load a little bit by maybe diet, etc.
Yeah, we have to do more than diet. Unfortunately, I think so many of these environmental chemicals can get out with things like sauna. So sauna regularly can be extremely helpful at lowering the burden, whether that's mold or some of these petrol-based chemicals. Some of the flame retardants, however, are very difficult to get out, just like plastics are very difficult to get out. And so avoidance would be key. Let's see, what are some of the other things that you can do?
When it comes to the sauna, is it best for it to be dry or can it be steam? Is there, because I used to have a dry sauna, now I have a steam sauna because it's more like temporary. And I find they're a very different experience, but I'm not sure how they affect the body. Do you have a preference on that?
It really, you can look at the literature a couple different ways. There's the Finnish sauna. These are both, so Finnish saunas are near infrared saunas mostly. And then you've got your far infrared saunas. The difference between the two is the depth of penetration as well into the body, as well as the temperature, right? So the Finnish saunas, if they're 180 degrees, you can't sit in there for as long, but you break into a sweat. And a lot of the medical literature is about cardiovascular benefits, longevity benefits, things like that. When you're looking at far infrared, the temperatures are much lower, like 110, 140 degrees max. And so you can sit in there longer. There is some thought that the far infrared will penetrate more deeply. I'm not sure about that. But because you're in there for a longer period of time, you're going to have more potential excretion of these environmental chemicals through the skin as long as you shower afterwards. That's important to shower after the sauna because you got to bind them up, right?
Yeah.
So using glycerin soap afterwards binds up more of the environmental chemicals on the skin. So those are some really simple things that people can do. If you want or need to be a little bit more aggressive, actually coffee enemas and colonics are a great way to get out environmental chemicals. They're not fun and you can't drink it to get them out. It doesn't work the same way. Sorry, nope. Because what happens is there are chemicals in the coffee or the stretching of the colon wall that induces the gallbladder to dump bile. Bile is where a lot of the fat-soluble toxins, PCBs, older pesticides, that's where they reside. And so dumping bile into the gastrointestinal tract away from food enables you to get rid of more of those environmental chemicals because you're overwhelming the recirculation that happens. And then you add some binders like charcoal, clay to grab some of those things to escort them out of the gastrointestinal tract. So if people really need to detox, those would be some things. Other things in terms of food, alkalinizing the diet by eating lots of vegetables is important. Anything with chlorella, spirulina, cilantro, some of the Asian vegetables. There's been medical literature that support the use that those can bind things, even some of the PCBs and the DDT, the older pesticides. So those things can be helpful. Simply drinking lemon water can be helpful, just alkalinizing the body that way. But they're subtle. Those are pretty subtle things. Sauna is going to be much more effective.
I think what I'm really kind of taking away is it's a whole approach and there's a lot of different angles of attack. And if you're incorporating all of them, you're probably going to be more likely to maintain it and also see more success. I know for me, I grind up lemon, ginger, and olive oil with water, distilled, purified water. And I drink a little bit of that every day, every morning. I've recently been turned on to something called swamp water, which I got a new juicer. I've had a juicer forever and it was dying, but this one is pretty fantastic. And the cilantro is surprising. So grandma's V8, but in the modern world, right? Throw a bunch of cilantro in there and it detoxes and does incredible things. I love this conversation. How can people learn more about you, get in touch with you? And of course we do include everything in the show notes, but how can they reach out to you?
Sure. I have a brick and mortar practice in Southern California and in Costa Mesa, California, Orange County. And the website is thespringcenter.com. We do ask that patients come into California. I have licensure in 12 other states, so I can potentially see people who are from elsewhere in the country. Depends on where they are, whether or not I can see them, unfortunately. And then people can also find me on Instagram at Dr. Kelly, Dr. Kelly McCann. And I have a personal website, Dr. Kelly McCann, also where you can read some blogs that I've written. I have a library of webinars that are fascinating, different conversations that I've had with my colleagues. So there's some more resources there.
Lovely. One last question, because I know I'm going to get this from people a lot. Are you seeing any success with treating autism?
You know what? I don't, even though I'm a board certified pediatrician, I actually don't see autistic children very much. I have a couple of, 20-somethings year old who are in my practice, but they have worked with other providers. I tend to see a lot more adults than children. And if I do see children, typically they're mold exposed. They might have some gastrointestinal issues, allergies, a little bit of behavioral issues, but I tend to not be the go-to expert for autism or PANS-PANDAS.
Well, listeners, if you are struggling with something complex, then your doctor has you feeling crazy, check out Dr. Kelly's website. And of course, it's always in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Kelly. It was a great conversation.
Thank you, Michaela. So happy to be here.
The views expressed in this podcast aren't necessarily those of the Sky Talk Doc. They're here to challenge your thinking and inspire growth. Until next time, blue skies and tailwinds.